In the vast tapestry of human existence, we find ourselves entangled in the chaotic threads of emotions, tossed about by the tempests of life. Yet, in the midst of this tumultuous sea, there exists an ancient anchor, a Stoic lighthouse guiding the wayward ships of our souls. Welcome to the realm of Stoic serenity, where the turbulent storms of emotion meet the unwavering wisdom of ages past. Picture this: our Stoic stands resolute amidst the crashing waves of adversity, unfazed by the relentless onslaught of despair. It's not a lack of emotion, but a mastery over it, an artistry in navigating the intricate dance of joy and sorrow. This wisdom is not born of indifference, but of a profound understanding of the ephemerality of emotions. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injustice. Marcus Aurelius. In the crucible of Stoicism, emotions are not adversaries but opportunities for growth. The Stoics beckon us to embrace the storms within, to confront the inner chaos with the calm of a seasoned sailor. Each emotional tempest becomes a refining fire, purging the impurities of our character, leaving behind the steel of resilience. As Seneca, the venerable Stoic philosopher, observed, "He suffers more than necessary, who suffers before it is necessary." Stoicism, at its core, is a call to wield the sword of reason against the onslaught of premature suffering. In the crucible of Stoicism, we forge the armor of tranquility, guarding our inner citadel against the arrows of external circumstance. The Stoic's art is in distinguishing between what is within our control and what is not. In the words of Epictetus, we cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them. This is the Stoic's creed, an unyielding commitment to the sovereignty of our own minds, an unwavering determination to sculpt our destinies from the raw material of the present moment. As we navigate the treacherous waters of life, guided by the ancient compass of Stoicism, we realize that true power lies not in the ability to control others or external events, but in the mastery of oneself. This self-mastery is the secret elixir that transforms adversity into opportunity, suffering into strength. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injustice. Marcus Aurelius. In the collective journey of self-discovery, we, as disciples of Stoicism, stand united. The Stoic brotherhood transcends time and space, linking arms across centuries. From the Stoic emperors like Marcus Aurelius to the humble philosophers like Epictetus, their voices echo through the corridors of history, whispering timeless truths to those who would listen. In the annals of Stoic wisdom, we find not mere philosophy but a living testament to the indomitable human spirit. Imagine standing shoulder to shoulder with the likes of Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, on the painted porch where the ancient Stoics convened. The lessons reverberate through time: the pursuit of virtue, the acceptance of fate, the cultivation of an unwavering inner fortress. In the Stoic crucible, we transmute the lead of despair into the gold of serenity. We are not passive observers of our fate but active architects of our response. The Stoic, with a heart tempered in the fires of wisdom, emerges unscathed from the crucible of life. So, fellow wayfarers on the Stoic path, let us embark on this transformative journey together. Let Stoic serenity be our guiding star, illuminating the darkness within and without. In the symphony of life, let our response be a resounding chord of resilience, echoing through the ages. As we face the emotional storms, armed with the ancient wisdom of Stoicism, we are not merely survivors, we are architects of our destiny, forging a legacy of serenity in the crucible of existence. In the crucible of ancient Rome, where the echoes of gladiatorial battles and political intrigues reverberated through the air, the philosophy of Stoicism emerged as a guiding light for those seeking inner fortitude. The Stoic principles were not just ethereal musings but a response to the harsh realities of life in the Roman Empire. The towering figure of Marcus Aurelius, a Stoic emperor, ruled during a time of immense external pressures. His reign, marked by wars and political upheavals, became a testament to the Stoic ideal of maintaining equanimity in the face of adversity. Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, a collection of personal writings, reveals his inner struggles and the Stoic resolve that anchored him through the storms of his reign. Epictetus, a former slave-turned-philosopher, lived during the times of the Roman Empire as well. His teachings emphasize the dichotomy of control, a concept deeply embedded in Stoicism. Epictetus endured the hardships of servitude and later became a revered teacher, proving that the Stoic mindset was not a privilege of the elite but a philosophy accessible to all. In the aftermath of a devastating earthquake in 79 AD, the Stoic philosopher and statesman Seneca found himself consoling the victims and rebuilding a shattered society. Seneca's writings, particularly his letters to his friend Lucilius, serve as a poignant guide for navigating the storms of life. His Stoic reflections were not detached academic exercises but practical responses to the challenges of his time. The very founding of Stoicism by Zeno of Citium in the early 3rd century BC occurred against the backdrop of Hellenistic Greece, a period marked by political instability and the aftermath of Alexander the Great's conquests. Zeno, influenced by the teachings of Socrates and the Cynics, sought a philosophy that provided a practical framework for ethical living amid a tumultuous world. Stoicism, thus, was forged in the crucible of historical turbulence, shaped by the real challenges faced by its proponents. The Stoic philosophers were not ivory tower thinkers but individuals who grappled with the same uncertainties, losses, and disappointments that afflict humanity. As we delve into the annals of Stoicism, we find not just a philosophical school but a resilient response to the uncertainties of the human condition. The Stoic practitioners, through their deeds and words, have left us a legacy, a timeless guide on how to weather the emotional storms with wisdom and serenity. Their stories, etched in the historical fabric of ancient civilizations, serve as beacons, lighting our path through the storms of our own existence. In the labyrinth of life's emotions, the Stoic philosophers provide us with a map, a set of practical techniques to navigate the tumultuous terrain and maintain inner calm. Drawing from the wisdom of ancient Stoicism, let's delve into these techniques, honed in the crucible of human experience. 1. Dichotomy of Control. Epictetus embrace the Stoic principle of discerning what is within your control and what is not. External events, opinions of others, and unforeseen circumstances are beyond our control. Focus instead on mastering your own responses, attitudes, and choices. By internalizing this dichotomy, you build a fortress of tranquility, impervious to the capricious winds of external chaos. 2. Premeditatio malorum. Seneca Seneca's technique of premeditating on potential misfortunes is a powerful tool. By mentally preparing for adversity, you steel yourself against its impact. Imagine the worst-case scenarios, accept their possibility, and rehearse your Stoic response. This mental rehearsal inoculates you against the shock of unexpected events, fostering resilience and maintaining equilibrium. 3. Negative visualization. Stoic exercises counterintuitive as it may seem, the Stoics advocated contemplating the impermanence of what we hold dear. By visualizing the potential loss of loved ones, possessions, or status, we develop a profound gratitude for the present. This practice not only guards against attachment but also cultivates a serene appreciation for the transient beauty of life. 4. Memento mori. Marcus Aurelius the Stoic Emperor Marcus Aurelius carried with him a poignant reminder of mortality, a practice known as memento mori, or remember that you must die. By acknowledging the impermanence of life, we are prompted to live virtuously in the present. The inevitability of death becomes a catalyst for intentional living, allowing us to detach from trivial concerns and focus on what truly matters. 5. Amor fati. Epictetus and Nietzsche embrace the concept of amor fati, or love of fate. Instead of resisting or resenting challenges, learn to love them as essential components of your journey. Every obstacle becomes an opportunity for growth, every setback a stepping stone toward wisdom. This Stoic mindset transforms adversity from a foe to a companion on the path of self-discovery. 6. Stoic journaling. Various Stoics commit your reflections to paper. Journaling allows you to externalize your thoughts, making them clearer and more manageable. Document your experiences, challenges, and Stoic responses. This practice not only facilitates self-awareness but also serves as a compass, guiding you through the labyrinth of your emotions. 7. Mindfulness and attention. Marcus Aurelius emphasized the importance of being fully present in each moment. By directing your attention to the current task or experience, you detach from future anxieties and past regrets. Mindfulness becomes a shield against the relentless assault of distractions, fostering inner calm in the midst of life's storms. In the crucible of Stoicism, these techniques are not mere abstractions but pragmatic tools honed by centuries of human experience. They serve as beacons, guiding us through the complexities of our emotions, offering a path to inner serenity amidst the tempests of life. As we integrate these practices into our daily lives, we embark on a journey toward a Stoic mastery of self, fortified against the chaotic currents of emotion. In the tapestry of existence, the wisdom of Stoicism beckons us to transcend the turbulent waves of emotion and anchor ourselves in the serene harbor of self-mastery. The practical techniques, forged by the ancient Stoic philosophers, are not relics of a bygone era but timeless tools resonating with profound relevance in our contemporary lives. As you stand at the crossroads of your own journey, consider this: the storms of emotion are inevitable, but your response is within your grasp. The dichotomy of control, premeditation of misfortunes, negative visualization, and the other Stoic techniques are not passive reflections but active choices. They are the chisel and hammer with which you sculpt the masterpiece of your character. Embrace these Stoic principles not as distant ideals but as guiding stars in the tumultuous night of uncertainty. Picture yourself navigating the labyrinth of life, armed with the wisdom of Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and their philosophical kin. As you confront challenges, remember the Stoic mantra: it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. So, let this be a call to action. Integrate Stoic practices into the fabric of your daily existence. Journal your reflections, practice mindfulness, and cultivate an unwavering love for fate. Embrace the challenges as opportunities, the setbacks as stepping stones, and the emotions as raw material for your Stoic craftsmanship. In the pursuit of inner calm amidst the storms, you are not alone. Join the timeless fellowship of Stoic practitioners across the ages. Picture yourself standing shoulder to shoulder with Marcus Aurelius on the battlefield of your own challenges, with Seneca counseling you through the trials, and Epictetus guiding your response to adversity. As the Stoics would say, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. The time to embark on this transformative journey is now. Take the helm of your own ship, navigate the emotional tempests with Stoic wisdom, and forge a legacy of serenity amidst the chaos. The Stoic path is not an escape from life's storms but a mastery of their currents. Seize this moment, for in the crucible of your choices, you shape the destiny of your own tranquility.